My name is Jennifer Chaika, and I'm the Programs and Exhibits Manager at the library. Joining me tonight is my colleague Megan Young from the Programs and Exhibits Department. She is an amazing programming librarian, and she'll be here to help out in chat and behind the scenes throughout the program. We're very grateful to each of you for being here for this evening of inspiration and insider tips. And now I'm excited to introduce tonight's speaker, Melissa Riddle. I'm going to tell you a little bit about her and then pass it to her. Melissa has been in the design and decor industry for over 12 years. She has worked at respected purveyors of high quality and stylish furniture, Jayson Home and Design Within Reach, and Wright's auction online marketplace, rightnow.com. She has a deep and passionate understanding of 20th century art and design. She holds degrees in interior design and psychology, which have molded her uncommon ability to help each client achieve distinctive yet intensely personal spaces to live and work in. Her areas of expertise are very exciting ones: fine art and vintage design, floor plans, textiles, restoration and upholstery, and unique wall installations. So with all of that, Melissa, we are so glad that you're here tonight, and the floor is yours.
Hi, good evening. Thanks you guys for the invitation to be here. Of course, I'd love it if we were all in a room together and I could see your faces, for who perhaps that will be in the cards soon. But until then, I'd like to thank the team at Arlington Heights Memorial Library for the opportunity to pass on some of my best practices and hopefully give those tuning in a little more confidence to reimagine areas of your homes and make them more gratifying and enjoyable to be in. Of course, this year has asked more of our homes than at any other time in modern history, I would argue. In many cases, becoming our workplaces, gyms, schools, places of worship, and somehow still serve as our sanctuary from it all at the end of the day. Needless to say, this has changed our perspective on life and living and may have you itching to redecorate. Here tonight to give you the basics for taking that on. So starting with tonight's title, so you want to redecorate. Before you get started, there are a few things you want to get settled first. And I'm just going to hop right in. The beginning of the presentation, the first half, I would say, is mostly about how to get started, how to do it in an organized way, what you need to consider. And the last part of it will be more about how to actually decide what things will look like and use some of my tips, the things that I use in my own practice to help you with that. So let's see. So before you get started, there are a few things you want to get settled. Careful thought and planning will go a long way to ensuring that your outcome is on budget and successful. So let's look at each one of these in detail. First, you want to define your goals and function of the space. Now, I guess with everything that's been going on, goals and function of our spaces has had to adapt quite a bit. And those things may stay with us, and other things we may revert back to how we used those spaces previously, thinking of how I've got to fit school into, our tiny footprint here in Oak Park. But something that you want to think about for what you're trying to achieve is how do you really use the space? It's important to work through the function as early as possible. You want to be really honest with yourself too about how you use it. For instance, if it's a living room, do you need a space for a television? How many people are going to be using the space on a regular basis? Do you lounge in it, or is it some place that you just pass through? Is it a traffic area? So do you have to accommodate flow and things like that? Or is it just, an office or some place where you aren't maybe spending the majority of your time? Maybe if it's an office, you are spending your majority of your time there. And finally, you want to ask yourself, are there any obstacles to achieving the desired function? And if yes, is this the opportunity to address them? So for example, if you've been in your kitchen that you are stumbling over your kids and other people you might live with, and is this a time to be able to make major changes, or does it have to be more of a short-term cosmetic stopgap? So this is the time to really think about what your wish list is, and is it achievable at the time that you're anticipating this renovation. Then you want to look into some inspiration. If you're interested in interior design, you're probably looking at inspiration constantly. And it's a great tool to help you refine your personal aesthetic. But it can be overwhelming. Sometimes you're responding to things that you like, but those things may not necessarily be ones that are appropriate for your own space, or ones that you're just responding to something Instagram beautiful and it's not necessarily practical for your home. So my advice when working through all of these images are some of the following questions. Something I always ask myself is it timeless? Trends are trickier than ever, and that they almost never seem to completely fade. Our aesthetic vocabulary has gotten a lot bigger as the walls have kind of come down between people who are professional designers and people who just do a great job designing their own spaces. The range for what's considered good design is vast and more inclusive than ever. What is important for you to establish is how long you need whatever it is you're investing in to last, and ask whether it complements your home or fights with it. Graphic tile is a recent example. I have in my image here of something that I'm starting to move away from in my own practice. Certainly there are applications where it's just right and jaw-droppingly beautiful, but there are many more examples where it isn't the right material choice to meet the performance demands of that space. One example is a lot of people that I work with now have chosen cement tile at some point in the recent past and used it in a high traffic area like a mudroom, or even not as great in a bathroom. And those tiles just absorb everything. They're really difficult to keep looking beautiful in those settings. They're also 5 years ago were crazy expensive. And now they're very accessible. And that look has just kind of become something that will date this particular period of time. Now, conversely, something like subway tile is ubiquitous. Everybody's used it in some form or another, but because it's been in use for so long, it's not going to, your kitchen isn't necessarily going to be dated or defined by that specific material. So if you need something to last 3 to 5 years, I say lean hard into trends and Instagram shots and all those things that people get really excited about and get you all the likes. But if you need something to last 10 to 15 years, not to say that you can't still get those same reactions, but you might want to approach it just a little bit differently. That kind of leads me to, will I tire of it? This maybe is more for myself because I tend to glom onto things and get really excited about them and then want to move on really quickly. And wallpaper is kind of the best example I could pull from for tonight of that. Wallpaper has really surged in the last 10 years and is now just as much a part of the designer toolkit as paint. That can come in wall coverings, which are generally more like grass cloth or wovens, things that just impart texture and color. And then some are large scale, bold, colorful prints. Wallpaper is excellent bang for your buck. It adds personality to your space without having to do very much at all. And it's easy, contemporary wallpaper is easy to remove. It's sort of designed for disassembly, if you will. And is great. Like I said, bang for your buck, you can't beat it, but it is more expensive than paint still. And if you hire an installer, that's an additional expense that probably means you're going to want to live with it a little bit longer than, say, painting an accent wall. It's also really hard to choose. I've had projects stall for months because we've looked at, maybe we've got it narrowed down to 10 papers and there's this fear of commitment that really keeps people from moving forward and with any project just because they can't commit to a paper. So depending on your personality, how long you need something to last, how easy it is to change, how expensive that initial investment is, you may want to go with one form of that or another. And lastly, with respect to inspiration, I think it's important to ask yourself if you can put your own spin on it. I always think of inspiration as a blessing and a curse. Sometimes you see something and it resonates so deeply that the impulse is to simply copy it. But what I try to encourage my clients and what I try to do for myself is to really sit with the inspiration and and kind of pick it apart, figure out what it is about the image or material that is really resonating with you. And, try to find a way that you can incorporate it into your space that isn't a literal copy of whatever that inspiration you saw was. Conversely, sometimes you'll see inspiration and you think that it's not possible for you to have it. But if you sit with the things that you really enjoy looking at and try to distill what it is about them that you're responding to, then oftentimes, even if it seems outlandish that you could have something similar, there's some kernel in there that you can pull on to kind of get some aspect of that into your space. And then what I think is, some of the best projects come out of that intense exploration. So it's worthwhile. Money, yay. Whatever your resources for a project are, it's absolutely essential to consider all of the expenses involved in redecorating or remodeling. Some items on this list are pretty obvious. Others can really sneak up on you, particularly material upgrades. Think of like if you're buying a sofa and you want it to be really comfortable, or the one you sat in the showroom had down and feather fill and a premium fabric. When you go to order it without those upgrades, it's going to have a different feel. And so it's just important to understand everything that you're sitting on and experiencing to try to anticipate some of those unforeseen costs. I also always recommend at least a 10% cushion when you're whatever project, big or small. There's always going to be something that comes up that you didn't anticipate. A good number of my clients come to me after a project is about 80% complete and they've run out of resources and energy to get it over the finish line. I always tell my clients decision fatigue is real. And sometimes that can be up to 2 or 3 years, maybe 10 after the majority of the work is done, that they feel like they're ready to kind of get back into it and finish things off. So anticipating some of these things can really just help put things in perspective at the point where your emotions are still stable and you can go into it just with your eyes a little bit wider open. You also want to think about where you're going to source items for this project. There's so much out there now. Loads of resources are there for every budget. And for online only, for instance, tends to be really competitive prices. We kind of know who all the major ones are out there. But there's the drawback of not being able to touch things, sit on them. And for some things, that's just a deal breaker for most people. Brick and mortar retailers, especially boutiques, typically have higher prices, but generally more hands-on service, both at the front end and after delivery. So for me, those are things that are worth investing a little bit more in it, so that I know that I have either the assurance of somebody that I can call if I have an issue or a warranty or things like that. For certain pieces are worth the extra money. So when I'm shopping for a client, I'm usually buying some of the larger, more important, more expensive investment pieces from a showroom or retail location. And secondary elements like lighting and accessories, tables, hard goods, I'll try to source as much vintage as I can. And then, the rest of it will kind of filter in from different online resources. That's kind of good approach to take, because if, for instance, something doesn't work out, you're returning a coffee table and not a sofa. So you have a place to, sit while you're waiting for your new coffee table to arrive. Designer access is great too, depending on the level of experience of the designer that you've hired, or just their service level. They may, source most of the things from designer only options. So there are benefits and drawbacks to that as well. But generally you're getting more custom options with that approach, and pieces that you won't, be able to identify as being from West Elm or Crate and Barrel or various other places. And, auction and estate sales, I mentioned vintage. I come from working 7 years at Wright auction, near and dear to my heart, that experience. Here in Oak Park, we have an auction house as well. It's just a good place to get things that are a little bit just with more character, interest, soul, as I like to say, and really good for tracking down regional art, bigger pieces that have a story and aren't necessarily mass produced. I have to talk about project organization. My near and dear friend Trello. I don't know how I would run my business without it. It's kind of like if Pinterest and a spreadsheet got together and made this lovely, lovely program. You can make these visual lists. I like to keep my top line of each card speaking to the sort of main visual elements. I can keep track of renderings here. You can share it with anyone. It's really easy to house links and things like that. So once you start to aggregate all of this information, it's really helpful that it's not buried on your phone somewhere as a screenshot and has a home in a place like this. Rendering and mood boards. I am a SketchUp fan. I use it all the time for my projects. There are free versions of SketchUp. It's pretty intuitive as a program, and if you like technology, it's really fun to just kind of get in and play with. I've been using it way more than I ever have before due to the need to be able to represent things virtually. But it's also just a really good proof of concept. I could tell this client about a curved sofa being ideal for the space, and being able to show them has a lot more impact and gets you just playing around, because it's just so easy to move things and change it up. Other visual programs I rely on that are really great for kind of more casual forms of documentation, PowerPoint, Evernote, Google Slides, produce something like this, really easily, and just kind of understand where you're headed with your design. Photoshop's a little bit more advanced, but mastering just a few tricks can give you very quick visual feedback for things like wallpaper. You take a picture of your dining room wall and put it into Photoshop, and cut that area out and put in the wallpaper, and you kind of get a good representation of how the scale might work and things like that that are important to consider. Magic Plan and Home Design 3D I don't use very much because I'm using SketchUp more, but it's an easy way to just plug in dimensions. If you're trying to figure out, the size of what sofa you need, one of these app style tools is really helpful because you can just plug in your room dimensions. It will give you can put in ceiling height so you get a sense of proportion as well, and then look up random sofas, drop them into it, and move it around the room, see how much area you have to walk around. Just really practical things that a program like that can help with. So that's kind of the short take on how to think about everything, kind of put ideas into different baskets, and get yourself prepared for what you actually want to make your space look like. Now I'm going to get into some of the principles that I rely on to solve the beauty side of the decorating equation, if you will. I've tried to put a lot of important information into this relatively brief presentation, so apologies if it feels like too much, but Jennifer, Megan can chime in if I need to slow down, or if you have any particular questions, just go ahead and let me know. So I was told by a friend recently that I talk about focal point a lot, but I haven't actually ever told them what a focal point was. So I'm going to define it for you now. This is your principal focus, the point at which all elements or aspects converge, the center of activity or attention. When I'm designing, the first thing I ask myself when I walk into any room, if it's my client or not, I'm doing this, is what is the focal point of the space? It's a great place to start if you aren't sure where to begin, and really easy to kind of determine. So there may be a natural element in the space that you want to highlight. It could be a fireplace, or the examples I have here, just, a cool architectural feature that not any of us probably have. But we all probably have bedrooms, and a bedroom wall is a great place to do, to set your focal point, your headboard wall. Maybe you have a fireplace. That tends to be the natural place to draw your viewers' attention when you're deciding what that focal point is going to be. There may be several focal points in a room, depending on your vantage point and depending on whether you have an open floor plan or more of a contained spaces. But there will be a primary one in every space, and all of your decisions are going to be made with this area of attention in mind. So kind of getting to what I promised in this talk are some of the ways that you might work toward defining this focal point and just giving the room a sense of being addressed. And I've categorized these in kind of ways that are really easy to achieve and not very expensive, and ones that are really more based in your home's value, and that can really cost quite a lot. You can read over here, paint, stencil, decals. Those are all, I think, in the spirit of wallpaper more recently. They're naturally less expensive versions of wallpaper that come out that are easier to maybe commit to and experiment with, stencils being one of those. I think if you're a DIYer and you're somebody who likes to dig into a good project, stenciling can take you far. Decals are great. I have some on my daughter's ceiling in her room because it's not something that I want to commit to for very long, because her whims are those of a 7-year-old, and who knows what next week she might want on our ceiling. So those are excellent ways and affordable ways to kind of get that feeling of addressing the space without having to spend a lot of money and time and energy. Retail drapery, window coverings, these are all things that you can buy in a weekend or buy more impulsively, but hopefully with a goal of achieving something. For window coverings, particularly if you've hung them more traditionally in the past, just a new set of drapes can go a long way toward defining your focal point, making the room feel updated and perhaps more grown up. And obviously things like area rugs, textiles, art, houseplants, all of those are opportunities to just layer and draw focus to a spot that you want to draw people's attention to. More expensive ways you can see here, millwork, casework, would be you have a fireplace and you decide you also need bookshelf space, and you decide to pay someone to build out a lovely wall for you of custom cabinetry and bookcases. But that's something that's going to stay with your home, and it's really an undertaking. So something to consider though. And of course, furniture can be inexpensive and very expensive. You can do a bit of both, but I always consider it as more of an expensive change. Paint though, and something I can talk about for hours, and we'll try not to, is probably one that most of us are pretty comfortable with. I'm sure we've all done it at some point in our lives, but it can also be an extremely high impact and inexpensive way to alter a space, really, really well. So one of the things that I wanted to distill it to 2 tonight, because like I said, I can talk about this a lot, but still worth checking out this kind of list of characteristics of paint that you might want to consider when you're looking at that wall of samples, or online or wherever you do your paint shopping. Value, your range from white to black, saturation and intensity, trim, sheen, and contrast and sampling. I'll talk a little bit about those, but the ones I was going to focus on tonight are LRV and sheen. Not going to talk about it for very long, so don't be afraid of the numbers, but it is worth mentioning that the LRV is this kind of cool tool that is visible on every sample that you might see, that gives you feedback, a metric that someone else has decided about how much light this paint is reflecting when illuminated by a light source. The higher an LRV, the more light is reflected by that color. And it kind of ties into, why are you picking paint? So if you're painting to brighten a space up, you might want to pay close attention to a color's light reflecting value, because it's going to give you, that solid metric for how much light that color is going to reflect. If you're relying on just a paint sample and looking at it, you might think that it's a light tone, but its LRV might only be something in the 60s range, which is still going to be more of a mid-tone. It isn't really going to achieve your aim of brightening up the space. So if you're trying to decide between, say, two colors or two grays, grays are popular still. And if you're looking at them and you look at one LRV is in the 40s and one LRV is in the 70s, and again, you're trying to lift the space up, you want to lean toward that lighter or higher LRV. Sheen. Sheen is a controversial thing, and everything that I tell you about my opinion on sheen is based on using high quality paints. And when I say high quality paints, I mean, places whose only task in life is to create paint for you. Benjamin Moore, Sherwin-Williams, Farrow and Ball, those are kind of the heavy hitters. There's more expensive paint than that, and there's certainly less expensive paint than that. But I think it's important to buy the paint that you can afford. Painters also tend to have strong preferences for paint brands, and they certainly have strong opinions about sheen. So the best thing that you can do for yourself is to research them, really understand the implications for each finish option, and pick a paint product. When I say Benjamin Moore, they have, right, like 8 kinds of interior paint. I'm a Regal matte girl through and through. So that is the paint that I love, and I try to use it all the time. Not everyone is going to be able to do $50 or $60 a gallon for paint. But if you can at least pick where proper sheen and pigment really matter, then do 70% of your house in one brand and 30% of it where it really counts. Moving on to sort of these qualities of sheen. This is the room I'm sitting in right now. Hi, it's my tiny room. So sheen or finish is the amount of light reflected as a result of the paint's surface, not its color. Most paint manufacturers offer a broad range of sheens these days, and I'm just going to kind of quickly run through them. So flat, kind of group them in their, low, mid, high sheen categories here. Flat, I wouldn't recommend anybody do anywhere on walls ever. It's kind of a ceiling only thing. There are even ceiling specific products that are actually really great. And your painter will love you for specifying them if you do. My go-to, as I said, is matte. You just get a velvety, highly pigmented texture out of the paint in a matte. And if you let it cure for the 60 days that a paint really needs to set on the walls to harden up, then I argue that it's just as durable as eggshell without the sheen. And that's been, I've had pencil on my Chantilly lace walls behind me that have an LRV of 92.2. You don't get much brighter white than that, and I'm able to just use a wet terry cloth rag to wash it off. So you can't tell me that matte isn't durable. But most people are comfortable with eggshell. My issue with eggshell as the standard is that it doesn't have a sheen when you're looking at it, but it definitely, directly at it, but it has a sheen when you're looking at it on an angle. So let's say you put eggshell in a staircase. When you look up that staircase, if there's particular light source at the end of that staircase, you're going to see reflection. And that variability just does not work for me. I like to know if I put matte on the wall, matte is going to be the experience. Then moving on, low luster, eggshell satin, those kind of fit in that mid-range. They're going to show some sheen, satin obviously more so than an eggshell. And that's kind of, satin is my trim sheen go-to. You definitely want a distinction between a change of material. So from drywall to, let's say, a painted wood, you want to have you want to detect some transition between materials, and you can go with a higher gloss that, you know, will give you even more contrast between the surfaces depending on what's on the walls. But it also reveals a lot more imperfections. If anyone on this presentation lived in a Chicago apartment at any point in their lives that had to be painted every time somebody else moved out, and they did it in a gloss, and you couldn't open your cabinets anymore because there were so many layers of paint. You remember how much you could see under that paint, right? That is gloss working kind of against you. So if you can do lower sheens, you tend to have a better outcome, even if you haven't really scraped down all of the layers to get there. Also, like, again, argument versus matte or eggshell, it's much easier to touch up a matte paint than it is to touch up an eggshell paint. So if you're going to gouge your staircase carrying up a piece of furniture, it's much easier to mend that if you don't have that sheen. So that's my 2 cents.
Well, Melissa, we have 2 questions, comments,
Okay.
and paint before we move on.
Sure.
So, first is revisiting flat. Why is flat not used? One of our guests says, my husband only uses flat and is a photographer.
Ooh.
So maybe that's the walls in that home that the flat really complement.
Yeah,
What do you
flat
think?
and matte are really close. Matte just gives that extra layer of durability, and that is, it depends on the color. So if you're living with a lighter color, which I mean, I would say even if you're living with a darker color, flat is super porous. So it's just going to take on really anything that happens to the surface. So if you do it in, you know, in white, in a hallway, every time something bumps into it, it's gonna tell you it got bumped into. And then when you try to go and scrub it, it tends to alter it sort of irrevocably. You know how words work. So it just wants to grab onto everything. Matte will give you a chance at standing up to it, and just that little bit more of lacquer, that's not the word I mean to use, enamel, will just give it a fighting chance. So also depending on your lifestyle and where the space is, what it is. I would never do a flat in a bathroom, for instance. It's just it's not going to work out well. So that's my avoid flat for, it's great again for pureness of pigment and that velvety texture, but save yourself some angst and just go 1 notch up the scale.
Well, and hopefully that helped you, Kathy. And I'm wondering then, if the pureness of the pigment is what your husband wants out of the flat paint, and his choices, knowing he's going to be photographing against it.
Yeah.
And then we also have a question about your space that you're sitting in.
Yeah.
Is the window trim painted, or is that a kind of dark wood?
It is painted. And I have it in my notes over here. This is Benjamin Moore charcoal in a satin finish. And then, like I said, Chantilly lace, let's see, which is the better way to, Chantilly lace on the walls, which is almost the whitest white that you can get from Benjamin Moore. And yeah, super durable. So painted, yes. Painting trim is a really excellent way to, especially in older homes, just kind of breathe new life into it. You can see a little bit from my image that it's just the window casing that I did the dark trim on. The baseboards are still white. All of the doors, door casings are also painted. They were previously white before, so I didn't paint over natural wood, which isn't something that I advocate for very often. Sometimes it's the only way, but they were already painted and painted them dark. And there's just this nice rhythm, which I'll talk about in a bit, with having that sort of sequence of contrasting doors to the white walls and not having that line across the bottom that ties them together. So consider that too. And it's relatively easy to change. High impact, low cost, easy to undo.
Okay, and then last question on paint, just so all the paint questions are together. Is the LRV found on all brands, and is it on the can, or where do you find that number?
Excellent. So let me just go back here for a second. You're going to find it on the back side of most paint samples that you would pick up at the store. If you're looking online, it's always going to be in here. Do, you know, like big box store paint companies, I would have to expect that they also refer to an LRV or similar metric. But I know that Benjamin Moore and Sherwin-Williams and Farrow and Ball do, and some of the higher, you know, end paints are always going to refer to that, that LRV. And I can't overstate how helpful it is, especially when it comes down to, say, you're down to your last three, you know, paints that you're considering for something. It's been a tiebreaker for me more times than I can count. So
thank you for all those. You can continue.
Okay, thanks. All right, so we're past Sheen. I think this is my last comment on paint, but I have to tell you guys to stop painting samples in the middle of your existing wall color. It's critical. You always want to test next to trim, and if you can do it on a, you know, a cardstock. If you get one of those little sample jars of paint from your paint store, paint it onto a cardstock and then move that around instead of painting on your walls. You want to see different exposures of light on that paint. I recommend, you know, having those paper samples, larger scale paper samples, and writing on them. You know, if you're trying to decide between two, look at it in the AM and vote for it in the AM, and then look at it in the afternoon and make a little tick mark for which one you like better in the afternoon. A lot of people are going to make me take that time to do it, but if you're picking your entire, you know, house color, it really is important to understand how that color responds in different exposures. And being able to carry that sample around is going to save you a lot of heartache. And also being able to put it in your trim. If you don't have wall trim, odds are you have a baseboard, and that is either a wood or painted something. And it's important to see that adjacency. Everything with paint is, what is it next to? If you have grays in your house and you have a gray sofa and a gray wall, I'm sure you've had the experience where you can tell that your gray sofa is actually purple and your gray wall is actually yellow. So those undertones really are, you know, dynamic and important. And if you're trying to, like, I think it's obvious, but on this thumbs down side on the right, all the same colors, 3 different backgrounds. So you can see how much the color changes just depending on what it's next to. So you got to put it next to your trim, please. All right, so enough about paint. Now I'm gonna get into sort of the nitty gritty tools that I use, and I'll try not to take too much longer because I don't want us to run out of time for questions. But these are kind of my tried and true things that I lean on. I mean, try to make sure that every project that I work on has, so that it feels successful in the end. Balance, layered texture, multiple sources of light, varied materiality, and use of negative space. Balance, shape, and contrast, or scale, shape, and contrast are really important factors to consider no matter what room in your home you're doing. I'm using this example here, and I'll kind of walk you through it. So, always starting with that, what is the focal point question? For me, that's this large, high contrast shelving unit. And when I talk about contrast, to me, it's a synonym for difference. It's just what difference is there? Is it high contrast equaling a lot of difference is at low contrast equaling a low amount of difference. So I drop contrast in there a lot, and that's sort of the point I'm getting at. So there's a lot of contrast in this shelving unit, right? White walls, black shelving, and then you kind of have this lovely mid-tone with the wood. If you didn't have other areas of high contrast in this space, your eye would go straight to the shelving unit and really wouldn't meander away. You want to have a focal point, but you also want to have elements of the room that kind of amplify and support that focal point. So by bringing the similar shape and dark contrast to the floor in this example, you're drawing your eye back down to the floor, which then as you pass through lets you notice this great, furniture that they've chosen here. The coffee table, which is hard to see in this particular example, relates back to the wood of the cabinet doors on the shelving unit. So you're pulling that perimeter value that the wood has and bringing it to the middle of the room. So it really feels like, you kind of have that element represented not equally, but like in a way that your eye detects that this guy has a buddy and this is all intentional. The yellow and contrasting curves of the furniture stand up to the impact of the shelving unit, but they're bold in different ways. So you have contrast in the curves of the furniture and contrast in color. So it's not trying to compete. If you try to imagine what this room would look like if that furniture was also black and streamlined, then it would just get really muddy. So you get this nice pop of color, nice curves, and everything kind of feels bold in its own way. Layered texture. It's kind of an odd one, but it's an important one. And I say layered because, in my opinion, you need more than one form of it to pull off a successful room. In this example, you have visual texture from the wallpaper, rhythm, which is essentially, for me, is repetition of certain elements. You have that in the glass panes, you have that in the way that the circular hardware on the cabinet doors kind of marches along. You have this sort of interplay with the opacity of the dining room table and the almost non-existent legs of the chairs surrounding it. So you have all of these little moments of give and take interplay that are kind of making this, it's all supporting that focal point, which clearly is this dynamic wallpaper wall, but in a way that's also interesting as you take in the entire space. Another examples of these rhythm, again, this kind of sense of repetition, surface texture, pattern, and playing with transparency and opacity are really good ways to narrow down maybe some of your furniture selections. If you have a really heavy sofa, then maybe the coffee table in front of it, you want to feel lighter, and just kind of pushing and pulling with these contrasts and opposites are what make things interesting to look at. Multiple sources of light. This is a big one for me. You don't want to have too many lamps, but having multiple sources of light, oops, I knew I was going to do that at some point, is important. And in my opinion, light is mood. All of us sad people know how important light is to just how we feel. So being able to modulate the intensity of light is super important. Having overhead lights, standing eye level, below on tables. I love a sconce, help illuminate the room evenly, but are also important from a functional standpoint. Some rooms might, require a lot of light, like a kitchen. And you want to be able to modulate that too, because sometimes you don't want to see your kitchen all that well. Correct me if I'm wrong. Next is just this nice example of a very successful use of basically every kind of light, and how that gives you just this kind of overall sense of illumination, but also a lot of interesting things to look at. We have recessed lights, your pendant light, table lamps, candles even here on the fireplace, and then natural light coming in from the side. And then a massive mirror that's duplicating all of that for you. So all of that lovely ambient light is just being reflected back at you. I would be remiss if I did not take this opportunity to speak to you all about the temperature of your lights. Uh, I go crazy. I don't know how many times my husband has prevented me from jumping out of the car and running up to somebody's house whenever I see cool temperature lights in a residence. It's a real sticking point with me. But just like LRV, we could talk about this all day. Lumens, rendering indexes, all of the things that have to do with how you select light for your home. The most important thing is, if you can do one thing, try to have all of the same light bulbs in your house at all of the same temperature. If you go in to one room, have it 2700, you go into the next room, have it be 2700. You will feel so much better to just have that ambient unification, continuity of your space. And people look better, you feel better, and your space looks better too. And it's a really easy, if you're venturing into LEDs, it's not necessarily the least expensive, but it is very high impact way of just making everything in your space feel nicer. Varied materiality, pretty well demonstrated in this visual example, but just keep it different, like pull in different materials, mirror, wood, stone, leather, cloth, metallics, glass, and brick. All of these things don't necessarily have to have color, but they just have an innate material quality that, when used properly in a space, make it feel just so much more interesting. Leather, for instance, if you have a leather sofa, I did it again. It reads as a hard surface, and depending, no matter what color that leather sofa is in, you want to make an attempt to kind of soften that. So you can use texture in contrast to the leather to just make it feel softer. And the more you can vary up those materials, the more exciting your space will be. Negative space. It's an important one. It's my last one. And it's, probably feels pretty good to look at this slide compared to the last one. I know it can be, especially if you live in a smaller space, easy to want to cover every wall, fill every corner, but leaving space for your eye to rest, if it's on a wall, if it's in your, the area of your home where you have your floor plan, it's nice just to suppress that urge and leave it open. Like, for instance, even with this sofa in this example, if it was up against a wall, you'd be losing the opportunity that this particular example provides of, being able to sit on the arm, sit on the back. Like, this kind of furniture offers that use variability, and shoving it up against a wall, you kind of you aren't able to utilize that aspect of it. So let your furniture breathe, keep it away from the walls when you can. Don't fill every area. Not everything has to be covered. This is one of my all-time favorite rooms. I have no idea who the designer is, and it's a free source image on the internet, but is a really great example, probably a more practical one, of how you can achieve negative space through the use of color. In this example, you have, this white sofa, you have texture and shape all in these various sofa cushions and throws on it, but it doesn't feel busy. The way that they've unified the color really kind of lets your eye wash over all of that, even this, dynamic window, and still feel like the focal point of the space is, a tie between this seating area and the painting that's leaning against the wall. Even the choice to just lean the painting against the wall instead of putting it on the wall, which might be the conventional wisdom that you would hang this painting, is creating tension and dynamics between the painting and the window. There's just some really cool, awesome stuff going on in the space that you too can use in your space. And finally, you don't want to amplify everything. Some things you would prefer to recede, and you can use that same trick to do that with, a bathroom tile that you don't have time or money to invest in redoing presently, or anything in your home that's always seemed like an unsightly element of it. You can kind of use these tricks of negative space and color to draw your eye to something else. Just kind of match sameness, kind of absorbs, right? And contrast amplifies. So try to kind of lean into the color or materiality of the thing that you don't want to see, and use that to your advantage. So I'm going to quickly go through this fun example. I just wanted to do a fun Photoshop thing to show you how all of this kind of comes together if I'm on a project. So here's our monochromatic space. We're adding warmth, identifying some cool architectural features with higher contrast, bringing in some layers. I love a painted ceiling. It serves more of a purpose than just, you know, a trend, fifth wall kind of thing that everybody gets real excited about these days, because it lets your eye see things on one level while still having interest at another plane that you can play against. And I love a painted ceiling. Balance with furniture, adjacent spaces, and having similar materials kind of allows you to vary your palette even further, but by having it in both areas kind of lends that continuity that you're looking for. Use lighting to tailor the mood and explore interesting shapes. I love large scale art. It tends, if you have larger other pieces and you have other small things next to it, they tend to kind of fade away unless you're doing a bigger gallery wall or a moment like that. So nicely scaled art. And then finally, layering, taking your moments to pull contrast into other areas so that it's not too heavy on the perimeter. I took the color away for this example, just showing that if you just kind of utilize all of these ideas, you don't really have to have color in a space at all for it to work. And so here's just a quick before and after of my fun Photoshop experiment. Last 5 tips. Determine your primary focal point first. Hang art with 2 points of contact. Save yourself headaches of having to walk by and make something straight again. I hang art from screws, not nails. Put 2 of them level into the wall, hang it from your frame. You'll be happy. Add points of contrast to every room. Again, it doesn't have to be a super high contrast, which is my personal addiction. It can be lower contrast, but that is what's going to draw your eye through the space. Coordinate, don't match. Like don't pick a paper and then pull the colors from the paper and have those be your toss pillows and your drapery and things like that. Go one step away, at least, from whatever that color that you're drawing inspiration from is, so that things can stay special. And give everybody a buddy. Continuity is really important. You can do whatever you want. You can have white oak and walnut in your space. That's fine. Don't certainly have all walnut or all white oak. You just need to give everybody a partner. And if you can do so on a different plane, say, for example, your floors are white oak and you want that to be a feature in a lot of new homes, it can be, then just have some white oak frames, a white oak vessel, something that draws back to your intention to have that be an element for people to experience in your space. And with that, I am done. I hope that this was interesting for you guys, that it was informative, that it wasn't too much of me talking, and helped. And I hope to take some of your questions. This is the part that I look forward to most.
This was great, Melissa. I love that you ended on your 5 tips and that having a buddy for your items was in there. I just love this idea of the things in my home having buddies. So I'm going to remember that.
Buddy.
We did have quite a few questions that came in throughout, and I just want to hit on a few of them. One was one of our attendees asking about recessed lighting in an old home because they don't have recessed lighting. Do you feel like recessed or overhead lighting is a necessity in the light balance?
It's not a necessity. I would probably lean on sconces, and I like cords. I know a lot of people feel like it has to be hardwired into their wall in order to be like refined enough, but I don't think that's the case. To me, cords are another tool to carry your eye through a space, another opportunity to be expressive. They, should be straight and go down to the floor, but they don't have to be contained. And there's so many interesting ways now to Colored Cord Company is one that I really like. They make fasteners for sconce cords that also have that little bit of sort of jewelry feel, and another element or opportunity to bring in a material quality. So I think you can go with sconces. You can, draw something up with a cord and have it hang over the space if that's what you like. There are certainly lamps that can give you that overhead feeling as well. So necessary, no, even a lamp on a high shelf, right? Like you just want to have it at these sort of different levels. And to that quick side note, Wi-Fi enabled lights are the best. And if you can change your bulbs to all Wi-Fi enabled, you can control them all from your phone. And it's terrific.
Thank you. That was helpful. Okay, so there were a few other questions about light, but I feel like we can't go into every one. So again, if
Email
you
me.
had a question and you didn't get an answer from Melissa tonight, please do contact her through her website, find her on Instagram. We do have an attendee who said that they need a new kitchen floor and do have a recommendation for something that's easy to take care of and doesn't show a lot of dirt. It feels like that's probably a very common need. So do you have
Yeah.
any good recommendations for that?
Maybe not necessarily specific tile, but material, porcelain or ceramic. I mean, if you're not going to have continuity with your hardwood, assuming that you have hardwood floors, then stick with something that has no maintenance. Midtones are going to hide most things. So depending on what your cabinets are, whether you have, white cabinets or dark cabinets or mid-tone cabinets, you want to have some contrast between your cabinetry and your flooring. So not a particular tile. I would say on the topic of tile that you will save yourself a lot of headaches if you can source tile locally. Shipping tile is super expensive. Oftentimes some of the, more high-end brands will not allow returns for any opened packages. And that can be a lot if it comes down to, one box of tile and you've only used one mosaic sheet out of, a box of 10. That could be a couple of $100. It's going to cost you money to ship it back, and it's going to cost you in that, if you open that one box, then you're stuck with this, massive amount of tile. So source locally, look at return policies, get samples, but ceramic and porcelain in your kitchen will serve you well.
Okay, we have another source question. One of the attendees has 3 pendants over an island, and they have bell-shaped glass shades from 15 years ago.
Uh-huh.
Where could they find just glass to replace, just new updated shades?
Sure. If you're looking for something that's just simple, I just did this in my downstairs bathroom and sourced them at Lowe's. Places like that tend to have the most, like the big box stores are going to have the most sort of replacement items and simple shapes. If you can avoid having clear glass in the kitchen, it's the bane of my existence. I don't put it in people's homes because it collects so much dust and grime, and then it's all visible. So if you can change to a frosted replacement shade, that would be my vote. But yeah, big box stores, everything else is obviously sold with a fixture. So check those sources out.
Excellent. I'm going to try and squeeze in like 2 or 3 more. So we're hitting 8 o'clock. If anybody does have to go, we absolutely understand, but we're going to just go a few more minutes more to get a few more
I have
questions.
nowhere to be, so.
Thank you, Melissa.
You're welcome.
So 2 questions about color. One attendee is asking, what do you see as, I'm sorry, I'm going back and forth between the Q&A and the chat. I don't want to get her question wrong. What are the color trends you think will hold up over time? White walls versus heavily pigmented jewel tones, for example. And then more than one person has said, are we done with gray yet? Or is gray still okay?
Sure. So to the first question about white walls versus saturated color, I think of color as livable color, and I tend to recommend for my own clients that the less you're able to put a finger on exactly what color it is, kind of the more timeless it ends up being. So if it's super primary or super, super saturated, I always think it tends to look a little on the juvenile side of things. That if you can just mute it slightly, you can still have that intensity, but just not quite so vibrant and bright. The other thing is if that isn't the entire room's color, let's say it's an accent wall and the rest of the room is white, that whatever that LRV is, whatever that light color is giving back to you is also going to hit those walls. Jennifer, I know you know all about that. And so you have to be sensitive to that too. Do you want your side walls to bounce that color as well, or are you looking for more purity? In terms of, you know, long-term timeliness of, you know, black and white will be around forever. Gray, I think we're always going to have gray, but it's venturing into warmer tones now. It may pendulum swing back to cooler tones at some point, but I really think it's all about adjacency. And, you know, do you have warm woods in your house? Then, you know, cooler tones tend to be a little bit more supportive of that warmer tone, giving it a little bit of something to play off of. Otherwise, everything gets too warm, right? You think about, you know, yellow kitchens and creamy appliances and everything just kind of turning into one big vanilla blur. You don't want that. You want to be able to pop that contrast in there somewhere. I don't think gray is going anywhere. I think just as we become more savvy about gray's temperamentality, that we'll use it more strategically and not have it be just this kind of baseline for what modern is. Does that kind
Yeah,
of
I think that's very helpful because I think what everybody here probably has seen is that has become the neutral color that every house which is flipped is painted with. So it's the base for everything, and when it's in every room, it doesn't have the same impact. One attendee did mention earlier in chat that they have a great white that looks gray in some lights,
Yeah.
and that's a good paint when it kind of is different at different times of day, but you like it in every variation.
Yeah. The other thing I will say too about gray is that I think it's moving away from the walls and moving toward trim. You're seeing a lot of exploration in painting trim in kitchens and basically everywhere else, colors other than white, but still having white be the wall. So it's a fun interpretation of it that, again, I feel like is easy to change, and you can participate in that wave, but you can also pull back from it when it gets to be too much.
Okay, and then I'm going to ask one more. There's so many good ones that are going unanswered. So there's so much interest in light and tile and everything. We're just going to have you come back and talk more about some of these nitty gritty materials.
Or email.
But this question was made for you. What are some good auction sources locally, and any tips for how to attend auctions?
Fantastic. So I don't know as much about north of Oak Park and where I live, but if we can use the city as a local hub, there's Wright, of course, 20th century art and design mainstay, now partnered with Rago from the East Coast. They have a no reserve sale every summer. That's the most fun. This past year, they even had it. There was just no preview, as far as I know. Preview, auction word, means when you go to see something. And usually there are very particular hours where all of that, all of those items, all of those lots are on display. So you want to, check in advance and make sure that when you show up at Wright, or Leslie Hinman is another one. There's, of course, Toomey here in Oak Park. Also has a really great 20th century department. Their modern specialists used to own a store on Ashland, Circa Modern. So, people who understand the retail market as well as the auction side of things. And then I think you just go into auction. Live Auctioneers is a great online resource. Usually there's an addition to buyer's premium, which is what you pay the auction house for the item that you're buying, which is usually between 20 and 25%. So you buy something, a hammer for $100, it's going to cost you $120. If you do that through live auctioneers, it might cost you $123. So there's just, everybody's getting their slice of the pie. But live auctioneers also has that kind of, you can see so much more than the individual auction house. So it's not a bad place to explore. You can set alerts for different things. Let's say you're, super into, I don't know, Genere or something like that, and you want to set alerts anytime something from Genere comes up, then you can do that and you'll get notifications, for better or worse. And then go into the buying process with your number in mind and just try not to get caught up in the moment. Stick with what you came there to do. I don't know that anyone's really able to attend auctions right now, but auctioneers love people in the audience. You're going to get, I think, just, that much quicker of a hammer potentially if you're in person than if you're just some click on the box of the person who's running the live auctioneers stream next to the auctioneer. So again, I could talk for hours about auctions, but
that was an important insider tip, because I think that's something that is really anxiety producing for people who haven't attended an auction. It just feels inaccessible. We've seen it in TV and movies as only high-end items, but I'm sitting at a dining room table purchased at auction for $500 with a paddle. I got over my anxiety and I just went and I got the table.
Totally.
So
And yeah, ask for those sales, like no reserve sales, because it's going to sell for whatever it's going to sell for. And it's a more spontaneous opportunity where maybe you can just go there and see things and just be seized by the moment instead of, having this really particular goal and plan in mind. I have too much stuff in my house from no reserve sales.
Melissa, thank you very, very, very much for your time. To everybody who was here tonight, we're so sorry we could not get to all questions. Please do, take advantage of reaching out to Melissa on her Instagram, through Facebook, via her website. Hopefully you did gain some tips and some inspiration to kind of kick you over the edge if you have some projects in mind that you were considering. We always want everybody to learn a little bit of something through each of our programs. We're very, very glad you chose to spend your night with us. And as a reminder, this was recorded. So if you saw things that you wanted to kind of write down in list order or tips, don't be afraid. You'll be able to access it at the YouTube channel, our Arlington Heights Memorial Library YouTube channel. It will most likely be posted within the next day or two. So we can send that link out to you through email as soon as that's available. So you can go ahead and you can get right to the part that you wanted to see twice. And Melissa, anything you'd add to end the night?
Gosh, I don't know. Do hit me up with your questions, and just don't take things too seriously, especially if they don't cost $1 jillion and are going to be in your home for, a really long time. Just follow what you really love and try to dig into why you love it, and that will serve you well.
That's excellent advice. Okay, good night, everybody, and thank you again.